So, wat is die veiligste? Om te vlieg of om met 'n boot te reis?
Sure.
Well, Andrew Pike's going to help us with that one. I don't know, as jy Afrikaans.
I prefer English.
Boat or flying? By boat or fly?
I'll fly.
You'll fly.
anytime. Yeah.
So big welcome, the Groot Ontbyt.
Thank you.
And you're the writer Against All Odds, the epic story of the Oceanos rescue. I remember this. I was 17 when it happened. It was all over the news. I think Andrew was just born. But it was a big story.
Yeah,
But
it was
before we get to the book, just a bit of background about yourself. I mean, you're one of the most senior maritime lawyers in South Africa, 30 years experience. And it's an industry people here in the Binneland, I mean, we know nothing of. I remember my uncle, he was the captain of one of the tugboats, Wim Rob,
Yes.
in Durban all these years. Taking the big boats in before they started using other technology.
Yes.
And it was fascinating being in the harbour in Durban and to realize that big industry. It's an industry really we don't know of if you grew up in Gauteng or the Free State. So just a little bit of background. Where did you grow up?
Yeah. So, funnily enough, I grew up in that well-known maritime city of Johannesburg.
Yeah, fantastic.
And the law firm that I started working with wanted someone to get some maritime expertise. So they sent me to join a London law firm on secondment for some time. And as it happened, I ended up staying in London, and then I moved to Luxembourg, and I was
Sure.
overseas for 4 years, and I finally came back to Durban. And having the maritime experience and expertise, Durban was the obvious place to be. And it really has been a fantastic opportunity. Apart from being a great place to bring up kids, the maritime work we did there was just so alive. We were on and off ships the whole time. And part of the process when we're investigating casualties is really to go on, interview captains, work with surveyors and engineers, see what happened, make decisions or help the captains make decisions which are going to affect the litigation at a later stage. So it's a very hands-on business. We end up flying down the wild coast when ships go aground. It really is the most fascinating business. You know, there's also the boring side of it, but there's a fun side. And, you know, if I had my time again, it would be exactly the same. Yeah.
I've just learned that it's maritime and not marine time. So that's a big one. But it's not your first book. You wrote a book, A People-Based Strategy for Business Success, and then The Talking Stick, Exploring Life's Possibilities. The writing side of you, is it just, you know, something that you wanted to write books, or the hobby?
I guess it's a way that I express myself best. I love writing, and I mean the 3 books that I've written are all in such a different genre, and it's
Yes.
just because I find different ways of writing. But the one way that I don't especially enjoy writing is legal writing. It's very formal, it's very legal, and it's not very readable for people. So one of my challenges with this particular book was to create something that was a readable, exciting story, and not something that was just another history book or a legal book or something like that. And that was my intention. It was not to let this story die, but because it's a story that should be told and retold. And I mean, you mentioned Henry, you know, probably not being born or just about. I think there's a whole generation of people who sort of 40 and downwards who just know nothing about this incident. And it was really important for me to record it, to tell people stories, and just tell something about one of the greatest adventures in South African history, and in my view, the greatest success in world maritime rescue history.
Where do you usually start when you decide, you know, I need to write about something? Where do you start, your starting point?
I guess it's the contents page. You know, what is it that I actually want to say?
Yeah.
And in this particular case, I wanted to tell more than what I knew about it. I knew a lot about the legal and technical stuff, but I wanted to tell the story. Where did this ship come from? Who owned the ship? What was her history? And then basically record the voyage of the ship and what happened during the whole adventure. And as I did, and so, you know, it was a logical way that I set out my contents page. My publishers, of course, cut a whole bunch of that stuff out.
Sure.
But be that as it may, it was really to take it from A to Z and say, and at the end of the book really say, well, what are the lessons that we learned from this thing? You know, no one in the whole country had planned for a passenger ship to sink. People don't plan for that. And so when it comes, it's like one of these black swans, you know, no one is expecting it, no one knows what to do, and you have to revert to basics, basic skills, basic knowledge, and hope for the best. And that's how it was with the Air Force. They'd never done an evacuation on this scale. The Navy divers, everyone did amazing, heroic work. And when I spoke to all of them, they all said, well, we were just doing our job. But this was all territory that no one had been in before.
We're going to get into the detail, the size of the ship and what exactly happened and what happened to the crew that was supposed to help. But that was for me at the end of the book very interesting. Okay, like this, maklik. So ons het dan nog so 'n bietjie paar vrae. Ek sien iemand vra vir my nou maar, hoekom antwoord ek nou nie? Vra ek nie in Afrikaans en die gas in Engels nie. For me that's very weird. Ek weet other people do that, but for me it's very weird to ask questions in Afrikaans and then you answer in English.
You're welcome to do it.
Ja, but I'm not comfortable with it. So it's always my weird. It's baie weird vir my. So ek doen dit nie so nie. Ek praat sommer maar gebroke Engels soos marine time in honored gears. Ons gesels met Andrew Pike, skrywer van die boek Against All Odds, The Epic Story of the Oceanos Rescue. So die mense wat dit onthou, stuur 'n bietjie vir ons 'n boodskap wat jy onthou. En dit's snaakse stories, ek wou dit eintlik gesê het nie, maar iemand het gesê, hier was hierdie twee mense, na die tyd praat hulle met televisie en sê meneer en mevrou so en so, en toe sit die man se meisie en sy vrou sien toe die onderhoud. And it's interesting, you said, it's a true story.
It's very much a true story. It was told to me on very reliable information.
Yeah.
And and it was just kind of incredibly bad luck for those guys.
Yeah, it's bad. And it was a couple that was on honeymoon. Just speaking to these people, how difficult was it to trace some of them and their stories after all these years?
Yeah, it was actually very difficult. I wanted to trace the sort of key players in the thing. Yeah. I found some in Australia. I found some in Canada, New Zealand. The Moss Hills, who was the guitarist, is on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean. He's a cruise director now. Robin Boltman, the magician, is in fact still in Cape Town. Okay. But these guys were all over the place, and it really was hard to find them, but very rewarding, and everyone was willing to speak to me, which was great.
And the biggest story those days was that the captain and basically the guys that was trained to help people just disappeared. And these normal guys became the heroes, just took over the responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a complete maritime scandal at the time that the senior officers and the captain left the ship very early. The captain said he was going for help. It was complete nonsense. And the ship was then left in the hands of entertainers, of guitarists, of musicians, of the TFC cruise staff, and they were helping load people into harnesses to be pulled up into helicopters. They were loading the lifeboats, and all of this, remember, when there'd been no abandoned ship signal given. They didn't, the Moss Hills, the guitarist, said he didn't think it was his place to start loading people because no officer had said abandoned ship. But when it was clear that the officers themselves had left, they then had to start doing something. It was absolutely amazing, and this was one of the miracles of this rescue, that there was no one in charge, and yet these guys stepped forward and sort of became heroes, really.
What happened? What caused the ship to sink?
So, at the time when the problem started, which was 9 o'clock at night, it was terrible weather. The Wild Coast, as you know, is a disastrous place for ships at times, with up to 30-meter rogue waves there. And while the engineers were working on a smelly and blocked sewage system downstairs in the engine room, something called a sea chest, which is a reservoir of water, broke off the side of the ship, and water came pouring in through the side of the ship. We think it was because the ship grounded or just touched the bottom when she was leaving Reunion 2 weeks earlier. And water came pouring in. The engineers could do nothing about what was the biggest leak you've ever seen in your life. So they closed the watertight doors and they went to get their life jackets, and they knew the ship was sinking. But now when you close watertight doors on a ship, it's designed not to sink. You're allowed to flood a compartment in a ship, and it's designed not to sink. So the mystery was, why did it sink? And part of the problem was that they were working on that sewerage system, and there was a hole between in the watertight wall, or bulkhead as they call it, and water came through slowly. So it turned, what was a big leak turned into a slow leak. And that's why there was enough time to get people off this ship. Wow. It took 17 hours to sink eventually.
Yeah, but I think it was, I mean, horrifying. I know one of the guests, I mean, people getting PSDD, a guy had to go into, what do you call that? Induced coma. Because of the fear. Other people were fine. And, but I think because we've been on a ship a couple of times. And as jy net aan begin dink, raak jy heeltemal gespanne.
Exactly.
If we quickly talk about the rescue, I mean, I love this part of the book, just explaining to you with our Navy, I mean, even planes from Bloemfontein, East London, Joburg, and it was all the old airports, and then also the other ships, like the Great Nancy, normal ships come to help. I mean, will we see this again? Are we capable to do a rescue like this again?
Well, I had a function last night, and a very senior member of SAMSA, the South African Maritime Safety Authority, and this question comes up at every function. And he was fairly adamant that right now we don't have the capacity to repeat this. And he says that a lot of systems are broken and it takes time to repair them. And having said that, he is very serious about fixing this. We had a maritime risk workshop a few months ago. I gave a talk about this, and he's absolutely determined to fix this problem of not having enough resources to deal with disasters. And it's not just sinking passenger ships, that's very rare, but cargo ships, there are oil carriers, you can have a huge oil spill, and again, we don't have the resources. So it is scary. You know, we're on a time bomb with this.
Ja. As mense motiveer gaan koop hierdie boek, ek dink dit is 'n ongelooflik lekker boek om te lees, en ek het ook nou hiervan gekry van daai man en vrou, maar ons gaan nie dit op die televisie sê nie. Ons is volwasse om dit net daar te hou op die boodskap, en om jou depressief te kry, jy kon die 14 aand trip gedoen het vir in 1991 vir R3,600, 14 dae. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the book, and enjoy Durban.
Thank you, Henry.
All the best.
Lovely meeting you guys.
Welkom by die Groot Ontbyt se YouTube kanaal. As jy dit nog nie gedoen het nie, maak seker jy teken aan deur op die rooi subscribe knoppie te druk. Yo, woo, woo.